The HHS mandate decision is here at the Supreme Court. I'm Jason Calvi. I'll have a full recap coming up next.
Reaction from the Obama administration to the Supreme Court ruling. Laura Cole is at the White House tonight. This isn't the end of the legal battle. We go inside one company where they're not backing down. And how is Pope Francis doing after a health setback? We take you to the Vatican, where he honored Saints Peter and Paul this weekend. Those stories and more just ahead on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, June 30th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Looking at your news now, a narrow decision from the Supreme Court this morning, but a victory nonetheless. Jason Calvi was there for this historic ruling. He is at the Supreme Court tonight to begin our coverage. Jason?
Brian, a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court today. Justice Alito had the majority opinion, and he didn't use the First Amendment for his rationale. He used the RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. The question for the court is, do for-profit companies have any right to religious freedom? The answer today, yes, some companies do. Now, in the majority opinion, they said the government does have a compelling reason, does have a strong reason to mandate contraception, but they didn't go about it with the less restrictive way.
Supreme anticipation. Rival camps huddling in front of the High Court this morning.
We want justice for our families.
People waiting to get inside since 6, all waiting for this moment when the justices announced their ruling on the HHS birth control mandate cases. The Supreme Court rules in favor of Conestoga Wood Company, Hobby Lobby craft stores, and their Christian owners.
Hobby Lobby wins! Hobby Lobby wins!
This is what we work towards. Checks and balances. This really is what democracy looks like. That when the president and his administration stepped in to regulate the healthcare industry, they hurt people of faith through the HHS mandate.
People of faith, the Hans and the Greens who object to abortion and abortion-inducing items, they can't be forced to provide those items in their health insurance plan.
On the losing side in the HHS cases, the Obama administration and abortion supporters.
Hey, hey! Birth control is here to stay!
I am upset by the decision. We think that religious liberty is incredibly important in this country. We believe that it means that I don't have to do anything I don't want to do because of my religion, and I don't get to tell my employees what to do, and that's part of what being an American means.
But not everyone agrees with that position.
The court also said the government, if it wants to get contraceptives out to American women, has other ways to do it. They can pay for it themselves.
Watching today's decision, other business owners.
It means a lot. We have a family business, and we want the government to leave us alone. We're a family that values life, so we're very excited about this.
Everybody, Hobby Lobby!
And in the dissenting opinion, Justice Ginsburg said that this was really startling in breadth. Today's decision was startling in breadth, she says. She says that now all for-profit companies can use RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, to oppose any law on religious grounds. But in the majority opinion, Justice Alito disagreed. He said there's no slippery slope here. He even said that for-profit business owners who oppose vaccinations, for example, would still, this ruling today would not apply to them. Brian?
All right, we will, of course, analyze both of those opinions in just a moment. But meanwhile, disappointment describes the mood at the White House tonight. Laura Cole has been monitoring reaction from the Obama administration to today's Supreme Court ruling. She joins us from the White House. Laura?
Well, Brian, this is a loss for the president and his administration. They say the court's decision will jeopardize the health of women. Now they must figure out exactly what this means and how many women will be affected. They say they strongly disagree with the court's decision.
We believe that the owners of for-profit companies should not be allowed to assert their personal religious views to deny their employees federally mandated benefits.
Now, the press secretary says that the president will call on Congress to act. Some will say that this is the president trying to undermine the nation's highest court, but it's unlikely that Congress will do anything. As you may recall, Congress was controlled by Democrats when Obamacare first went into effect. Now, Republicans control the House, and as you know, they would like to repeal Obamacare.
Laura Cole at the White House tonight, and James Capretta with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and Carrie Severino of Judicial Crisis Network with us tonight. Carrie, you were there. There was a lot of rejoicing. Is this a broad decision or a more measured one?
You know, the court did a measured decision today in that they didn't decide things they didn't have to. They didn't decide if it really was a compelling government interest to provide free contraceptives. They said, assuming it is, the government has not done everything it could to not burden religious freedom. The government, as was said earlier, the government could pay for it themselves. And so they actually kept it into as narrow as they could go. They only talked about closely held corporations. So I think while it still impacts a lot of people, it's a narrow decision.
A victory or so-so?
Oh, I think it's a very big victory. Look, I mean, this case was boiling a couple of years now. It's a huge victory for religious freedom to have a case that says the government can't do this without a really strong reason and without examining every other alternative. So closely held companies are going to be able to opt out of this. And I think the question is what happens next.
Mm-hmm. And Justice Alito alluded to the accommodation that was made for religious organizations. Does that spell trouble for not-for-profits like EWTN, Priests for Life, as their cases still come up?
I hope not. Look, the accommodation also is going to be contested in the courts. It's a phony accommodation in all candor. It doesn't really change the dynamics of the moral equation. It makes these employers get entangled with this equation. I think it was cited in the Supreme Court case to try to bolster the reasoning for allowing the Hobby Lobby company to get out from under the mandate. I do worry about it a bit, and I think a lot of people are worried about it a bit, and I want to make sure that the arguments that are being made in the forthcoming cases are very strong, that the accommodation is phony and can't be relied on to get around this.
Why did the government jump into this in the first place? Were we facing some kind of a crisis with women not being able to get contraception?
Well, I think as we've seen, the pro-life cause has really gained a lot of traction over the years, and now actually abortion isn't the hot button issue that it used to be, to help Democrats in particular try to bolster their points, and they're looking for another issue. In fact, most Americans use contraception, and most people, even who are opposed to it, aren't trying to outlaw it. It wouldn't be constitutional currently to do that anyway. So it's really just an issue, I think, that's trying to get people ginned up politically rather than something that's a real issue. I mean, for years, companies haven't had to provide it. We haven't seen a disaster for people who wanted contraceptives. Really, it's just a fake political issue, I think.
Totally agree. I mean, this was a contrived political issue. It was really drummed up to try to help the president, frankly, get reelected in 2012, to sort of create this perception of a war on women if you were against this issue. But there was never a big issue of inadequate access to contraceptives. They're readily available, very inexpensive, very easily prescribed by physicians in public and private clinics. So there was no issue. It was really, the idea of free contraceptive for everybody was sort of the rallying cry for a political issue.
In the White House response, the president said, the president's spokesperson said that he's calling on Congress to act now like there is some kind of a crisis. What can Congress do?
Well, actually, the Congress could create, if they really wanted to, for the people that want to opt out, they could create a new program and pay for this directly through taxpayer funds. But of course, that has its own issues. A lot of congressmen will object to having taxpayers involved for paying for this. Rightly so, of course. So I think the real issue is that the president is trying to just punt it to another part of government. Having had this defeat today, they're trying to blame somebody else.
And I think the president, if Congress doesn't act, which seems very likely, because Congress, as representatives of the American people, actually probably doesn't want to just have everyone foot the bill for contraceptives. I think he's going to possibly take action on his own, as he's tended to do, and to just say, well, I'll do it myself, which is dangerous because this president hasn't shown a lot of respect for the separation of powers in our government.
There's a lot more to come on this. Carrie Severino and James Capretta, thanks for joining us tonight. Well, an appeals court in Atlanta has granted an injunction preventing the government from enforcing the HHS mandate against our parent network, EWTN. Without this injunction, the government could have started assessing the network huge fines starting tonight at midnight. Earlier today, EWTN CEO Michael Warsaw talked with us about the next step in the network's challenge of that mandate.
We will continue our appeal of the district court ruling that ruled against us. We'll go back to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta and begin to, again, press the case that the accommodation scheme that the government has put forward, which the justices refer to in the Hobby Lobby case, we'll argue that the accommodation scheme for a faith-based organization is not, in fact, the least restrictive means that the government can use to accomplish its goal. That the government should have, from the beginning, provided EWTN and other plaintiffs like the Little Sisters of the Poor and other Catholic entities of an outright accommodation, or an outright exemption from this ruling.
Warsaw called today's injunction a huge step in the right direction. We'll have more on the implications of today's Supreme Court ruling just a little bit later on. Also today, the court dealt a blow to public sector labor unions. Justices ruled that home health care workers in Illinois cannot be required to pay fees that help cover the union's cost of collective bargaining. Unions have increased their ranks and their bank accounts by signing up hundreds of thousands of in-home care workers. In a separate case, the High Court rejected a challenge to California's law that bars mental health counseling aimed at turning gay minors straight. The justices let stand an appeals court ruling. It says the ban on conversion therapy for minors doesn't violate free speech rights of licensed counselors and patients who are seeking treatment. Now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world on this Monday. Israel announced late today the bodies of 3 teenagers kidnapped in the West Bank have been found. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused Hamas of being behind those murders. He says that militant group will pay a heavy price for the deaths. The teens disappeared while hitchhiking home near the West Bank city of Hebron late at night on June 12th, and they were never seen or heard from again. Despite the dangers, hitchhiking is common among Israelis traveling in and out of Jewish settlements in the West Bank. President Obama is addressing what he calls a humanitarian crisis on the U.S.-Mexico border. The president wants Congress to give him increased powers to send unaccompanied children entering the U.S. illegally back to their countries in Central America. In a letter to congressional leaders, the president asked for increased penalties for those smuggling vulnerable immigrants such as children. Since October, the Border Patrol has apprehended more than 52,000 illegal immigrant minors crossing the border on their own. A man with experience leading a giant global corporation has been tapped by the president to head the troubled Department of Veterans Affairs. Former Procter & Gamble CEO Robert McDonald is a West Point grad and a former captain in the Army. The VA has been plagued with huge problems, including reports of delayed treatment that may have resulted in the deaths of veterans. Well, after canceling a visit to a hospital last week, Pope Francis had a packed schedule today, dispelling concerns about his health. The Holy Father celebrated his last morning Mass with the faithful before his summer break. In July, he won't hold the daily Mass or Wednesday general audience. He'll resume the audience in August. The daily morning Mass, usually open to Vatican workers and some invited guests, will begin again in September. Pope Francis received an invitation to visit Spain today. The new Spanish king and queen were at the Vatican on their first foreign trip as monarchs. King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia were greeted by Francis in the papal library. They talked for about 40 minutes in private. The Queen wore white, that's protocol. The Vatican said the cordial talks focused on church-state cooperation in Spain and unspecified global conflicts. Francis has met with Felipe's parents, King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia, on several occasions, the last time during April's canonizations of Saints John Paul II and John the 23rd. Of course, Juan Carlos abdicated earlier this month. Over the weekend, the Pope celebrated Mass for a very special feast, and EWTN News Nightly's Alan Holdren takes us there tonight.
St. Peter's in the Vatican. Sunday was the feast day of the martyred Saints Peter and Paul, leaders and patrons of Rome. Pope Francis is the successor of Peter. On this day, every year, these woolen reminders, called palliums, are given to each of the world's new archbishops. Just feet above where St. Peter is buried, each receives a sign of his own responsibility for his flock.
What it refers to is unity and communion, the bond of charity and strength to carry out responsibilities as an archbishop. And so that's really what it is. It's a sign of our communion with the Holy Father and with one another in the College of Bishops throughout the world. Everybody in life has their challenges, but being an archbishop, a bishop, requires sometimes a little extra help from heaven, we might say. And so This is a reminder that the Holy Father is with us in our exercise of our ministry, and we're with him as part of the College of Bishops and the Church Universal.
These are the successors of the apostles, 27 archbishops from 24 nations, and after this Mass with Peter, they return to their flocks. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
Such a beautiful Mass. We are going to show you more of that and hear some of the beautiful music a little bit later on. Pope Francis called for peace and dialogue in Iraq at his Sunday Angelus. He said the news from Iraq is painful, and he urged governments to preserve national unity and avoid war. The Holy Father also expressed concern for refugees and his closeness to the thousands of families forced to leave their homes, especially from Iraq. The Pope said dialogue is the only way to peace. In Iraq today, people are reacting to a militant group's declaration of an Islamic State in the territory it now controls. The al-Qaeda breakaway group known as ISIS has overrun much of northern Syria and parts of neighboring Iraq. The group demands allegiance from Muslims worldwide. The move could further strain relations with other militant groups, but some experts say the declaration would not make much difference to most Muslims in Iraq or elsewhere. Meanwhile, Catholics held a Mass in Kirkuk today, praying for the safety of two nuns. They are believed to have been kidnapped on Sunday by ISIS in Iraq's northern city of Mosul. It's the country's second largest city. It was captured by the Sunni extremists earlier this month. Monday's Mass was celebrated by Archbishop Yusuf Thomas Mirkis.
We hope that they won't be hurt and that they will be released as soon as possible. We also hope that peace will prevail all over the country.
Many Iraqis fleeing the violence in northern Iraq have come to areas around Kirkuk. Well, back here in the U.S., police are searching for two men who shot 9 people in New Orleans. Those shots were fired on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter yesterday. 2 people remain in critical condition. 6 others are in stable condition in New Orleans Hospital. Bourbon Street is probably that city's most popular tourist destination.
You don't expect to hear about a shooting on Bourbon Street or just off Bourbon Street and come down here for vacation, want to have a good time. And that's crazy. That's a lot of people, too.
The New Orleans mayor is pledging a swift response from his city's law enforcement community. Well, we're now in the second round of the World Cup, and the energy is picking up. Before today's France and Nigeria matchup, fans on both sides were singing, dancing in crazy costumes, and confident, of course, their team would win. France tried to make it to the quarterfinal stage for the first time since 2006. Nigeria was hoping to make the last 8 for the first time ever in the World Cup.
To cheer up Nigeria so we can win this. We need to win this. This cup belongs to Nigeria. No going back.
The game was tied 0-0 at halftime, but France came out on top with a 2-0 final score. And the soccer mania doesn't end in Brazil. In fact, some fans are actually out of this world. 2 American astronauts bet their German crewmate they'd shave their heads if Team USA lost to Germany in World Cup. Well, Germany beat the U.S., of course, 1-0 last week, so Steve Swanson and Reed Wiseman made good on their friendly wager.
We're speechless.
Now, if Germany had lost, their German crewmate would have painted a U.S. flag on his already bald head. Coming up, Muslims observe the first day of Ramadan, a holy month of fasting and prayer. We'll show you what it's all about. Not guilty, and a not-so-surprising plea from the Libyan militant accused of masterminding the Benghazi terror attack. Thank you for being with us on this Monday, the last day of June. I'm Brian Patrick as EWTN News Nightly continues. The man in charge of compensating the victims of crashes in small General Motors cars is prepared to pay out billions of dollars. The money would be divided among those who can prove that the car's faulty ignition switches caused the crash.
GM basically has said whatever it costs to pay all eligible claims under the protocol, they will pay it. There is no ceiling.
This year, GM recalled 2.6 million older small cars to replace those ignition switches. The company says the defective switch is linked to 13 deaths, but trial lawyers and lawmakers say the claims for wrongful death and injury could total in the hundreds. Muslims observe the first day of the holy month of Ramadan today. Local shopping areas in Karachi, Pakistan were filled with people buying food for breaking the first fast. Some food items are made especially for this occasion, and people crowded the streets in search of those items. But one man complained that no help was being given to the poor. He said shopkeepers in Pakistan were actually raising prices, using Ramadan as a time to profit. As the day ended, Muslims gathered in mosques, praying and ending their fasts together. The body of some 30 would-be immigrants were found in a packed smuggler's boat on the way to Italy this weekend. These are the latest ocean deaths in a European immigration surge. The small boat was overflowing with almost 600 people. The victims were believed to have suffocated or drowned during the crossing. Italy's Navy says they rescued more than 5,000 migrants overall this weekend alone. Officials say the migration numbers are swelling because increasing conflict in Syria and instability in Libya is causing people to flee. Last summer, Pope Francis celebrated Mass in Sicily, commemorating thousands of migrants who died trying to cross the sea from North Africa. Well, the Libyan militant accused of masterminding the 2012 deadly Benghazi attacks is pleading not guilty to conspiracy. Ahmed Abu Khatala is accused of participating in a conspiracy to provide material support and resources to terrorists in those attacks on the American embassy on 9/11, 2012. The attack killed U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens. 3 other Americans also died in that attack. At a hearing this weekend, Abu Khatala spoke just 2 words, both in Arabic. He replied yes to swearing the truth and no when asked if he was having trouble understanding the proceeding. The government says it will file even more charges against him. Up next, there's a good deal of optimism tonight from other companies challenging the HHS mandate. And a beautiful voice highlights Sunday's colorful Vatican celebration of Saints Peter and Paul. Thank you for joining us here on EWTN News Nightly. And as you saw in our live broadcast this morning, as well as at the top of this news, supporters of religious freedom are celebrating today's Supreme Court ruling in favor of Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood Specialties. In a 5-4 narrow decision, the court ruled against a key part of Obamacare that requires companies to cover contraception in employee insurance plans. It's a ruling that could serve as a model for future challenges. Our Wyatt Goolsby is here looking at possible implications for other cases moving forward. Wyatt?
Well, Brian, more than 50 nonprofits have sued when it comes to this contraceptive mandate. Many of them are making an argument similar to the one Hobby Lobby used. They say the health care law forces them to violate their religious beliefs. And while today's decision doesn't mean all the companies suing will win their cases, it is a reason some are saying cautiously optimistic.
We have a moral and ethical objection to the federal government telling us that we have to fund that which kills babies. Can't do that.
If you were to ask conservative writer Brent Bozell what he really thinks about the health care mandate, he won't hold back. The founder of the Media Research Center, a group that identifies liberal bias in the media, continues to fight for an injunction that will keep them from having to pay for contraceptive coverage. It's one of many organizations still fighting despite today's Supreme Court ruling.
I'm not going to give up on the proposition that the better angels of our nature will come through. And prayer and hard work hopefully will get us there.
Bozell and the MRC have been criticized for their political statements over the years, but he says the mandate is not about political views, it's about personal freedom. For Catholics, promoting the church's position on contraception goes beyond the courtroom. Campus Minister Amy Kovacs at George Washington University's Newman Center says making sure college students are properly informed helps them to evangelize on campus.
We do encourage the students to know their facts, know how harmful contraception is medically, biologically, hormonally. I think sometimes just the facts is enough to convince people, and also to know their faith, to know the reasons why they believe what they believe.
Kovacs says promoting Catholic values can be a challenge, especially on a college campus. But she says forming a community supportive of one another can help Catholics strengthen their faith and their message.
They feel that they're alongside others, striving for the same holy life and an authentic Christian testimony.
There is no doubt religious freedom and abortion will be topics in political races across the country this November. And Brian, something to keep in mind, there are still dozens of for-profit and non-profit companies that are still involved in some type of litigation when it comes to this mandate.
Wyatt, thank you for our continuing coverage on that important decision today. President Barack Obama says the United States will support the construction of a solar power plant in Chile. Obama was meeting in the Oval Office today with Chilean President Michelle Bachelet. He told reporters as the meeting got underway that he will be announcing collaboration on clean energy, including a major solar facility to help meet Chile's energy needs. He also joked around a little bit.
I want to welcome back to the Oval Office President Bachelet. She is my second favorite Michelle. I'm very much pleased to see her again.
And I'm sure his Michelle was pleased to hear him say that. Bachelet was elected president in March. She previously served from 2006 to 2010 as Chile's first woman head of state. Well, it's part of our daily routine that probably a lot of us take for granted, a shower. For the homeless, though, a shower can be hard to find, but that is changing in San Francisco. The Bay Area homeless population can now clean up thanks to a retrofitted bus. The creator of the nonprofit Lava Mae mobile shower bus says she wants to return a sense of dignity to people living on the streets.
We're seeing them come off the bus if they haven't showered in a few days or a week or so, and their faces are just beaming and they're so incredibly grateful. It's a great feeling to just be able to offer people something so simple and yet so vital.
This bus features 2 full private bathrooms with hot shower, shampoo, soap, and towels. Lava Mae hopes to add additional buses in the Bay Area in coming years. Nonprofits around the world have also contacted Lava Mae about operating similar buses in countries overseas. Well, that's it for tonight. We thank you for joining us. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch us again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick, and as we leave you tonight, let's revisit the striking beauty of the Pope's Mass this Sunday for the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. Good night and God bless you.